Hey guys, welcome to another edition of the Right Way Wednesday. Today I have Sara O'Brien from the QA and Compliance team with me, and we wanted to talk a little bit about everybody's favorite topic, documentation, right, Sara? In regards to how we think about it. So not necessarily how to do it right in best practices, but how we are really as clinicians thinking about documentation in general, because, I know as a clinician, you really just want to focus on patient care and you don't want to really have to think about documentation at all. And, for a very long time as an industry, we were able to really kind of get away with that, right? Thinking about documentation, just, I'm going to get it done at the end of the day. It really is just a supplement to what I'm doing. And it's really not all that important at the end of the day. And as we all know and have all seen across the industry, we are getting more scrutiny on our documentation, and probably rightly so in a lot of ways, because we haven't been putting that much of an emphasis on it historically. And now payers are really looking at our documentation to make sure that we are both billing appropriately and then delivering a skilled service. And often our documentation doesn't necessarily support that. And I know that when I was treating, just before I began this position, I was doing a bit of a hybrid. I was documenting, I was a treating clinician, documenting in a clinic on a daily basis, sort of had that mindset about documentation. And then I began working in the QAC team on a PRN basis, helping with appeals. And I began to see what reviewers were saying about documentation that looked like mine at the time. And I sort of had this aha moment about what I was really missing and what I wasn't really showing in my documentation by just working to get it finished. That was all I was really kind of thinking about. And I know, Sara, you probably had a similar aha moment at some point, and I know that you also work with clinicians, RDs, are just everyday clinicians that are out there just trying to treat and take care of our residents on appeals, because we really like the collaborative process. And I know you've probably seen some similar aha moments. And Sara actually told the team about one particular story about an ALJ. And if you don't know what an ALJ is, that is a third level of appeal for Medicare. And that is when we really go in front of a judge, usually over the phone, so it's not in person, but in front of a judge, and sort of plead our case about why we think our claims should get paid. And we have begun over the last few months, actually, maybe 6 months or so, maybe even a little bit longer, to really engage our clinicians in this process too. And some of the clinicians have had an opportunity, as in the story, Sara, I want Sara to tell you about, to actually defend their own documentation in front of a judge. And Sara, I think you had a great story about one particular case. Would you just tell us about it?
Sure. And actually, since our call last week, I definitely have had another situation where this happened, where an RD was on the ALJ hearing. And while it was really myself and the RVP at that time doing the defense, pleading our case, trying to prove, what we knew happened during those treatments, but what really wasn't showing in the documentation. It was some follow-up questions from the judge that caused the RD who was on the call to jump in and say, hey, I was actually a treating therapist for this patient, and here's what happened. We really did see this progression in the patient's ability to function and ambulate within their environment and return to their previous level of function. It was actually his insight that caused the judge to go, oh, great, that's wonderful insight. But the thing is, when we did our review of the documentation prior to that, that kind of stuff wasn't in there. Those details, the showing of that progression wasn't in the progress notes and the daily notes. And it took us being on an ALJ hearing and then having the RD jump in with extra information to really, show our case. But the other thing that happened was another ALJ hearing, we had an RD on, and he was the person defending the case. He was able to give information about what the facility was like, how the distances in the facility, the types of activities and functions that the people at that facility had to be able to do in order to stay there. But that stuff wasn't in the documentation to begin with. He had to supplement the documentation. And it really shouldn't get to the point where we're doing ALJs just to supplement that documentation and prove ourselves. It really needs to be in there in the beginning. And I think and I don't think, but I know that rehab director saw that there was a need to have that kind of information in there. It was that aha moment where, oh, it really is necessary for us to, prove that the patient has to be able to walk from their room to the dining room, and that is 300 feet. We need to be able to show that, and they need to be able to do it at either a supervision or an independent level, to say in an assisted living. They can't have too much physical assist. It's all based on whatever site they're at, but that's the kind of information that I think really wasn't there. The rehab director saw that it needed to be there, and that's really important information to take back to the team as well, to show, hey guys, we really need to be getting this into the documentation. So that's my recent story.
Yeah, I mean, so because when you think about the appeal process up to the point that you had this ALJ too, I think it's really important to think about how much time and energy had been spent on the back end, right, after this claim denied, as compared to how much time and energy could have been spent had the documentation just contained all those very patient-specific details. It's really kind of mind-boggling to think about how much a few extra minutes over the course of that plan of care, just documenting those details, could have saved hours of all kinds of people's times at the end of the day, just trying to defend the claim. And if you know about the ALJ process, you know that, or the appeal process in general, it takes years to get to an ALJ hearing at the moment. And so think about how much time and energy is spent and then waiting on that to happen. So, we talk a lot about providing that facility-specific, patient-specific detail versus just those generic statements. Like you mentioned the gait, right? So why is it important they have to walk 300 feet? If we're just talking about getting them to 300 feet, well, what does that really matter for the patient? That's a great story, and I think a great experience. So I just think, and Sara and I just wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit, because it is so important to think about our documentation just in a different way. So hopefully that kind of helps you to think about it in a little bit different way. You can share your experiences too below about how you might have shifted your thought process about documentation and why you might be putting a bigger emphasis on it now. We would love to hear your stories. Thanks so much, Sara, for joining us. I really appreciate it. You guys have a great day, and happy documenting.